Mortgage arrears are growing very fast in Canada right now. They're growing faster than what they were growing in the 90s. But before I get into this, a lot of people have been asking me to talk about this land title issue that's going on in BC right now. And I don't have that strong of an opinion on it yet because I really want to understand what's going on. I don't think it's going to be as bad as what people think it's going to be. People are instantly like, well, if it's going to happen here, then it's going to happen all over BC and everyone's going to lose all their property and be bankrupt. And I don't think that's going to be the result. I don't think it's going to be the absolute worst case scenario. It's usually somewhere in the middle, somewhere in between. But what I will say objectively is if you're going to screw around with people's property, that is a lot of people's that's every penny they've ever earned, every hour they've ever worked, all their net worth. That's what they have to show for it, is the house. That's it. That's their entire working life of 50, 60 years. Every dollar they've saved, every penny, everything, all of the time and health that they've traded is that house. And if you back a dog into a corner, the dog will bite you. And if you're going to do that, I think you are backing a lot of dogs into a lot of different corners. And it's going to be a very big problem if it's going to go that way. You know what I mean? That's my opinion on it. And it seems like every time things are starting to get better, we have some type of massive structural problem like this pop up out of nowhere. You know, the timing is very interesting. It's almost 2030. No, I'm not going to actually say what I'm saying, but if you know, you know. So anyways, that's my opinion on the land title thing. I don't think it's good. I think it's a big problem. And I think if it's going to go down this way, you're going to be backing a lot of different people into a corner. And when you the proverbial dog, is that the right thing to say? I don't know. If you back a dog into a corner, it's going to bite you. I think you're backing a lot of dogs into a lot of different corners. So anyways, Canada's more, that's my opinion on it for now. The more information we have, I want to fully understand what's happening before I have a very strong opinion on it. But objectively, I don't think you can argue with me on what I just said. But anyways, Canada's mortgage arrears are now growing faster than the 90s. The arrears rate climbed again in August, according to the Canadian Bankers Association, which represents the country's largest lenders. Investors have brushed off the rise as a return to normal after record lows. What they may not realize is that the late 1980s also saw a record low, followed by a long, painful climb. This time, it's rising even faster. So Canadian mortgage arrears rise to highest rate in nearly 5 years. So here we are, and we seem to have bottomed in about this time, 2022, fall 2022, and it's just been on a parabolic uptrend since. Now, I want to highlight over here, arrears peaked for the 90s correction in 1997. Now, if we look at the price of homes peaked, the top of that bubble was 1989. So delinquencies or arrears didn't peak until 8 years later in 1997, Q1 1997, 8 years after the peak of that housing market. And then, you know, if this was on the residential property price index, if this was 45 Q1 1989, well, when were we higher than that and going up? It would have been right here at the back end of 1998 is when we started moving up again. So basically, like, what is that? A year, pretty much a year after delinquencies peaked. Actually, basically 2 years after delinquencies peaked, or arrears peaked, sorry. Same thing. That's when the market started to recover in price. So we're 4 years after the peak of the housing cycle right now, or the peak of pricing in the housing market right now. We're 4 years later, basically. And this took 8 years just to see the peak of arrears, and then another 2 years after that to start seeing price appreciation again, or a recovery, right? Or prices starting to go back up again. Well, actually, that's not true, because prices actually would have bottomed before that. You know what I mean? Because, you know, at 46, you're actually higher than peak pricing in 1989. So it took, about 10 years to go back above that peak pricing, right? So you would have bottomed somewhere in the middle here, right? But basically what I'm saying is to actually see a recovery, to things starting to get better, prices going higher than what the prices were, that didn't start until a decade later. And the arrears didn't peak until 8 years after the peak of the housing market. So then they go on to say, it's not the level of arrears that matters, it's how fast they're climbing. A high but stable rate means the scope of the problem is known and it's being mitigated. So if it's high, but it's not rising very fast, they know what the problem is, and now they've controlled the problem. But in our case, the rate is continuing to go up very fast. So we don't know exactly, well, I'm sure we know what the problem is, but it's definitely not mitigated. Canada's arrears rate fell to a record low of 0.14% in mid-2022. By August 25, it climbed to 0.24%, which is a 71% increase in under 3 years, marking the fastest rise since the GFC. Canada's last major housing correction occurred shortly after the mortgage arrears rate fell to a record low of 0.18 in 1989, and then over the next 91 months, the rate climbed to 0.65%, which is a compounded 18.4% rate of growth. And basically what they're saying is if you invested $100,000 at that same rate, 18.4%, you'd have $361K over the same period, showing that it's the velocity of the increases, I guess, that are actually worse than the amount of arrears, right? It's kind of what they're highlighting. The current climb has persisted for 35 months, with arrears rising from 0.14% in mid-2022 to 0.24% in August 2025, which is a 20.3% CAGR, which is faster than 18.4, over 10% faster than the 90s. If the trend continues for the same length, the arrears rate would hit 0.57%, matching the rate in 1996. Climbing for that long may seem absurd, but prominent economists are warning investors that this correction will persist for years. So what is 91 months? What is that in years? 7.5. So they, over the next 91 months, the rate climbed. So they had arrears rising for 91 months. We are rising at a quicker rate right now than we did in the 90s, 10%. So let's just say it's 10% again, or through and through. We are 10% worse than we were in the 90s. So let's times that by 1.1, 8.3 years to see the peak of arrears, which would bring us to 2030. Would be the peak of arrears. And if we follow the 90s and prices are higher after that, prices are higher than, is that what happened? Prices were higher than peak prices. Let me go back to this. So it was 45 in 1989. Prices were actually going up as delinquencies were rising in the 90s, apparently. And the bottom would have been basically right after that in the 90s. And then the prices started rising again immediately afterwards. So I'm going to say we're probably not going to do that because our correction is apparently much worse this time around. I don't know how accurate this is. It's tough to find data for Canada's real estate market from back in the day. The Fred tends to have the best data. But I know Ontario had a really bad housing correction in the 90s. But again, this is like all of Canada, all markets, all product types. So even though Ontario maybe went down a lot, once you add in all the prairies and stuff, maybe it wasn't that bad on aggregate across all of Canada, right? But anyways, back to the topic at hand. Okay, what did I say? 8.3 years, I think it was. The old one was 7.5 times 1.1, so 8.3 years, right? So that brings us into 2030, and assuming prices are higher 2 years after they go past the peak pricing 2 years after the time that arrears peak, that brings us to 2032, which honestly has made the most sense to me for a while. A lot of what I'm seeing on charts, historic real estate cycles, the build cycle, all these different cycles, everything is aligning with 2032 being where we eclipse that 2022 peak pricing, and we basically enter a new rabid bull market. That's what I've seen from a lot of the 18-year housing cycle, the build cycle, like all these things, all these people that talk about this kind of stuff. The 2030s are when we would see our next bull market. So that would make sense to me. But yeah, according to this, arrears are probably going to rise for another 3 years, 3, 4, even 5 years, bringing us into the early 2030s. And for the land title issue, I'm going to wait until we have some more information before I take a really strong stance on this. But again, what I will say is that if you're going to screw with people's money, if you're going to back people into a corner, you're going to have some pretty big problems. And that's what I would say for now. But if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you want to chat with me about buying or selling real estate in the Valley, there is a link down in the description. Otherwise, I'm that Agent Kelly. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.